Thank you.
So just a question. After you heard Chris's talk, how many people are convinced that we got a problem and need to do something about it? Just raise your hand. Let me get a sense. Good. I can drop the first part of my talk. I don't need to convince you of that. What I would like to do is talk a little bit about how some companies that I've had a chance to work with kind of look at this issue, what motivates them, what moves them. I think it might help you pick which companies you want to work with or the company you're currently in today, what they're doing. And the second topic would be around some consortiums, public-private partnerships that are trying to work on the problems Chris has described. And perhaps it will be something you could use from that. And the third part is us have some discussion, questions and answers, and I think that would be great. As Sally said, I worked for DuPont for 30 years. And so I looked back and said, what moved DuPont, a 200-year-plus old company, into really thinking about the environment in a different way? And you'll hear a myriad different stories, but this is my story about how it happened. And it was November. It was raining. It was a little cool. It was a chemical plant in New Jersey. Greenpeace scaled the fence about 5 a.m., climbed the water tower, unveiled a big banner that said, DuPont, world's #1 polluter. And of course, they came up the water tower, chained themselves to the top of the water tower, and of course the TV trucks rolled in just as the sun came up. And our plant manager handled it very carefully. He said, we want to get them down safely. He did a really good job. He eventually got them down. The key thing is they had aimed this big banner at a major bridge coming across the Delaware River, and the word polluter was so low, all people could say DuPont #1. So all the costs, absolutely true. People started calling in, we knew you won another award. You never hang a banner from your water tower. It must be really big. What is it? So even the local Philadelphia news picked it up and got the humor of it. And they got down safely, and we kind of actually were doing good. And that was now the next morning, we were having the debrief meeting, like how'd they get over the fence, which was a real question. But we were kind of patting ourselves on the back and felt really good about what happened. And then one voice came up and said, but they're right. And that was silence. What do you mean they're right? We're not a polluter. Well, it's all within permit, but we're really putting more out than anybody else, not world, but certainly in the United States. And it was just a silence and kind of a drained feeling in the room. I know how it felt at that point in time. And we said, does it have to be that way? His first reaction, we're the biggest? Of course it has to be that way. Well, it doesn't. And so we took a goal. We'll get off the top 10 list. We can be the largest chemical company and still not be on the top 10 list for pollution and make a difference. And so to me, that's what started a different mindset in the company. It took a few years before it gained momentum. It had a whole bunch of fathers and mothers to make it a success, but that's what moved. So I think as you look at companies, think about what those moments may be and who's that one voice that will stand up, because if that person hadn't said that, I guess we'd eventually gotten there, but it might have taken, a long time. One other story from DuPont that I think can be very instructive about what Chris was talking about and how we deal with this issue, and this was the ozone layer. This is the hole in the ozone created by CFCs. So I found myself as head of sales and marketing for DuPont Chemicals. CFCs, Freon, was one of my products. In the morning, I was sitting around the table with about 4 of our people. We were waiting for the announcement. Because our chief executive officer a few years earlier had said, if they ever prove scientifically this is creating the ozone layer, we'll get out. He didn't say what get out meant, but we'll get out. And the National Academy of Sciences were about to release their report. It was going to say definitively that was the case. So we were going to get the word about an hour before everybody else so we could figure out what to do. I had given a lot of input to the decision, but wasn't in the room when they made the decision. We were sitting there, and we had a lot of different ideas. Are we going to challenge the science? There'd be a lot of different things that could come out. We were not prepared for what we got. So as we read the announcement, it said, the science is settled. We don't need to do any more scientific study. We're going to live up to our word to get out. Remember, CFCs are refrigeration, the whole food supply, medical supply, so you can't stop immediately. And we said, we will be out in 5 years. Not only will we be out in 5 years, but we'll create the replacements, and we'll have enough capacity for all of our customers in 5 years. And you sat there, and it was just amazing watching the people in the room. I can remember it perfectly. Everybody kind of sat up really straight because you were so proud of your company. And then you realized, we didn't know how to do all that. And our job in the next hour was to call our customers and explain to them what was going on. And so can you imagine the conversation? So the first customer, he says, oh, you're getting out of CFCs. Where am I going to get my stuff? And we said, don't worry, we got a replacement. Then he says, what is it? Well, we got 3 really good leads. And he says, will it work in my equipment? Well, it's got to work in your equipment. We know we can't make this change. And then what will it cost? Well, it's kind of hard to tell, but it's going to cost us a lot to do this. It could cost more. And you hear them kind of hanging up, calling our competitors to line up their product, right? That decision, though, led to the Montreal Protocol and led to all the competitors coming on board and led to, I think, a very significant environmental accomplishment. Now, if you look back at how it actually played out, there were some things that were very important. The 5-year fix was important. Montreal Protocol adopted essentially our 5-year date, but date certain was important, very, very, very important. The second thing was the fact we were going to stop producing, but we didn't have to destroy what we had. Number one, it wouldn't make a lot of sense to destroy it, but that sent the message on efficiency. So we stopped the leaks immediately. We didn't have to wait 5 years for that. We started making progress right away. And then what we saw was a very unique thing in industry is we knew we couldn't get there in 5 years if we had our normal intellectual property battles. So if we would go down one route and somebody was going to block us and we couldn't get there. So everybody cross-licensed, everybody royalty-free as long as you're in the game. And I think those things together, we got there. And we got there relatively smooth. On the positive side for industry, people saw a gigantic market opening up. So a big market was going away for CFCs, the replacement was taking their place. Now we're fast forward to today, the issue is how do we replace the things we replace those with, HCFCs. So, but I think that it's nothing like as complex as the climate issue Chris described, but I think there's a few learnings in there if we can finally make them work to go forward. One other company example I like to talk about, I've been on the board of Bank of America for 5 years. As I came in, I'm an engineer, not a banker. I don't really know why I'm here. So Brian Moynihan, the CEO, said, we're doing a lot of good stuff on sustainability. And I said, oh, sure you are, because I had this prejudiced view of what banks are. Why don't you go look at what we're doing? So I looked around. Number one, I found tremendous reductions in our own CO2, which was very impressive. A world scale building in New York that's the best as far as I can say is greenhouse gas emissions is kind of a role model. But more important, a $20 billion commitment that Sally mentioned to encourage people to take on sustainability projects. They were mostly renewable energy projects and energy efficiency projects. And it multiplied throughout the bank, throughout the world, is here's an opportunity. This company wants to finance these projects. Now, this wasn't putting our money at stake, but it was going out and finding our customers, putting together the deals that would happen. And it was a 10-year commitment, and they did it. $20 billion, big commitment. And when they got to the $20 billion, they said, well, that was a good start. Let's go for $50 billion another 10 years. And that's what was just announced a year ago. So what I found through going out the bank, because of these goals, because these public goals, and they were serious, they really kept up with them, you found people really started thinking about it differently. I was with the head of the bank in Brazil, and it was just a little bit of a test. I said, what does this really mean to you? I wanted to see if he really knew about it, what's going on. He said, let me tell you exactly what it means to me. I've got this much of the balance sheet I can use. If I can bring in those projects, I can get more business and I can make more money. So it was very critical that he was then on the lookout for those kind of projects. And I think that's what's very critical. So do something in your company, so whether you're financial services or you're engineering or whatever, you got everybody looking for ideas, and that's critical. Announcement the bank made, Brian made just last month at the Climate Summit in New York. First part was working so well. We said we need to do more. So we put a catalyst initiative for finance for these type projects. We say we'll put $1 billion of our money up, not just encouraging others. We challenged 9 other banks to match us, to make $10 billion. And we've worked a deal with the development banks to take our $10 billion when we get it and leverage it up to $120 billion for energy access and efficiency around the world. I think a major step forward. Now, why would a Bank of America be here? You keep saying, here's all the list, and was Bank of America owned because they put an ATM outside? No, but it's because of these things that they're looking at. and they see it's a better way to serve their customers, and they also see where the market is for the future. So summing up companies, there's two examples. I think companies will work in their self-interest, but you've got companies that have been around for 100 years plus and plan to be around another 100 years. They're looking at these issues differently. So search those out as you go forward. Let me move now to a couple of consortiums that I'm a part of that I think if you wanted to be here today, you might find them interesting. So the first one is Sustainable Energy for All. Excuse me. This is sponsored by the Secretary General of the UN. And Ban Ki-moon said, I want my legacy to be doing something about climate change. And I was very honored to co-chair for him with Conde Yemkela from Sierra Leone, a high-level panel to say, if I want sustainable energy for all, and the Secretary General believes it's the golden thread that deals with so many water issues, food issues, so many things, how do we do that? So if you could think with me for a minute, because we're still open to ideas, but you're given that challenge. He gets a high-level panel of people together from all around the world. We have 14 months to come up with what to do. What we concluded is we got to make sure we don't care who gets the credit, because if we're trying to add everything up and get the credit, we'll never get there. And second, we got to keep it pretty simple. So what we ended up with were 3 goals. There's 1.3 billion people in the world without electricity. We want to get electricity to all of them. There's 2.4 billion that are cooking on a cook stove. It's going to kill them. We got to change all those out. Second, if we stop just there, we haven't dealt with the other part of the equation. So we got to double the rate of energy efficiency improvement in the world, and we got to double the market share of renewables. And it doesn't get to quite the numbers we need, Chris, but it sure does give it a long kick down the road. And we do all that by 2030. So that was our goals. We decided we could never add up all the projects. It would just be too many. We get an accounting issue and we get into who's going to take credit for it. So we went to the World Bank and said, I bet you could bring together a consortium of everybody that measures this stuff and give us a report every 2 years. The next report will be out early 15. Are we making progress that we should have to the 2030 goals? And we're very much waiting for that. What we found is the number of companies, the number of civil society organizations, the number of governments that stand up have just shocked us. So we were first releasing this and getting it moving. We said we need 10 countries. If we don't have 10 countries that'll sign up to our deal, we're not credible. So Conde and I said, it's going to be hard to do to get 10 heads of state or people to do this. So we said we will challenge them to get 25 and hope we really get 10 so we won't be embarrassed. So Conde pulled up a bunch of his buddies from the UN. He's a UN official long-term. And they said, we need 25. And we were pretty good salespeople at that. And so they said, to really get 25, then we'd go for 50. We ended up with 72. 72 countries that said, we'll understand what you want in the energy plan. We will help you understand what are the issues. Is it rule of law? You don't have the right enforcement in place, what's necessary. In fact, we got so many, we had to focus it back down to 20 of what we could actually do. So we're off and rolling. We've got 8 hubs around the world. I won't take you through all the detail, but they're renewable energy hubs, energy efficiency hubs. So I think this should be a hub right here. I think we've missed you. So I think number 9, we can probably announce this afternoon because we don't care we want everybody else to get the credit. So I think this is something pretty exciting. And I think it deals with the issue. And it also deals with this access issue. Conde's from Sierra Leone. And, I talk to him almost every day. And obviously with the health issue, this has just been a tragic time for his country. But every time I get too focused on the energy efficiency and renewable stuff, he brings me a picture back from home of women carrying firewood. And one of the women was his sister. So it really, it hit home. And I think about the tragedy going on now. It's even more reason to make this work as we go forward. Last example before we do some questions. President Carl Lerone from Mexico called about a year and a half ago and said, we're trying to answer a question. Because we got people that say it's about the economy, it's about jobs. We got other people like Chris would say, it's about climate. And so we got this debate saying if we do one for jobs and we do one for climate, it's kind of a compromise. Carter Lone's question is there a set of things you can do that actually deal with both? And his premise was, we're kind of stuck in neutral right now because we're not really investing in the old economy because we're a little concerned about that, and we're not really investing in the new economy, and that's one of the things holding the overall economy back. So the idea was to do a study to see if we could find the answer. We were sponsored by 7 countries, a lot of environmental organizations and different companies that got involved. And we just released the results last month. So the answer to the question, is there a set of things that do both? You might guess the answer is yes. Right? Then the second question is, but how much does it cost? Is it much more costly to do it in an environmentally right way? And the answer is yes. It cost $89 trillion over the next 15 years to build out the infrastructure of the world the way we're currently doing it today. And if you want to do it in a sustainable way, it'll cost $93 trillion, 5% more. I think a pretty good investment. So that's fundamentally what the work came out. It's called The New Climate Economy. It's on the web. You can look at it. I think you'll find it actually a very interesting read and very complementary to what Chris just talked about. Let me just give you a few highlights from it. So the question of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels for the next 15 years are absolutely a part of our mix, but it becomes very clear as you go through it. You want to bet against coal, you want to bet on natural gas, and you want to bet on carbon capture and storage to team up with your natural gas. If you put that together, you probably, at least for the next 15 years, and probably a long time beyond that, you have a really workable mix of the fossil fuel solution. The second question was financing. People have not been willing to invest in these projects. When you think about large financial services institutions in the last 5 or 6 years, you generally haven't accused us of not taking risk or being creative in our financing mechanisms. Is that a fair statement? In this area, you could criticize us for that. Because I think we have been too conservative. We haven't listened to what the investors wanted to invest in, what kind of instruments they needed, and make the money flowing out in the form that people needed over a long enough period of time and the sizes that we needed, because it's very different than other kinds of investments. So very justified criticism for our lack of creativity. I'm very proud to say Bank of America and many others have stepped up to that. Let me just give you one example. 5 years ago, there was something called a green bond. That's a sustainability bond that a corporation would issue, and they pledged to use that money toward sustainable projects. 5 years ago, there were 3 billion issued. This year, there will be over 40 billion issued. There has been an unleashing of this. I'm glad to say Bank of America was one of the first ones to do it, to basically match investors with users. There's a new instrument called yieldcos, which is an equity instrument that a good friend of mine from a solar company, I won't use his name, but he's from Europe. He's been in the business for 20 years. He said, this is the biggest change in the solar industry I've seen in 20 years. And we know the technology's moved tremendously. And I said, you mean outside the technology? He said, no, this is so much bigger than the technology, because all of a sudden we now see a way to invest in these projects. So the second thing from our new climate economy study is the financing is there. And this is a change in the last 5 years. Does that mean every project gets financed? Of course not. But I think there is a very significant change going on. And third, how many people saw shale gas coming the way it did to change the energy picture in this country? Would you raise your hand, please? At least you're honest, okay? So a lot of people say, well, why didn't we see that coming? Well, that's an interesting question, and we could probably talk about that maybe later. But the really important question is, what's the next shale gas? What's the next one? And I would say, from working on this new climate economy report, energy efficiency. I think the potential for energy efficiency, it's not as exciting. It doesn't get people kind of excited in the morning, let's go get energy efficiency, but it can make the biggest difference. It's a 2-for-1 payback in the lowest possible case. And with the technology available today, if we could just get the mindset around energy efficiency, we have a lot of our problems solved. So in summarizing these two things, I think there's some really good things going, but they'll only work if you don't care who gets the credit. And they're public-private partnerships. They're civil society organizations, have to work with business, have to work with government, have to sit down at the table to make some progress. And these are two that are kind of working out very well. And I'd love to take any questions you got or your comments. Thank you very much.
Okay, questions. We want to start over there. Yeah.
Hello. Congratulations on your work and thank you for the talk. A twofold question. What are your expectations for the COP21 in Paris? And second, how can we bring in the big companies from developing countries to act more significantly? And what I have in mind is someone like Mr. Carlos Slim to do something more meaningful with his companies. Thank you.
So, I was in a series of sessions last week talking about Paris. I think the food's going to be very good. You understand? No, seriously, it's going to be a challenge. There's no way around it. There's a really good work going on. I'm more optimistic about Paris than I was Rio and where we are today. But I don't think you can put all your eggs in that basket. That there's going to be the definitive agreements, the 5 years like we have with CFCs. I just don't think that's practical. But I think we can make a lot of progress. I think Chris's chart showing how many agreements are already out there, build on that base. So I think they'll build on that base. I think Paris will be a step forward. But I believe we're going to have to make the case to companies and to governments. It's in their interest to lead. I believe that's the way it's really going to make a difference. I think you raise a very interesting question about developing country companies, especially people like Carlos Slim, who understand the issue. I had dinner with him once, and I said, "How'd you get so rich?" And he said, "Well, I know the value of things. Other people know the price of things." So I think if we could kind of teach him a little bit the value of the environment, I think that'd be a step forward. But I think that's a really interesting point. We hope sustainable energy for all will be a part of that. We're working with developing countries, and I think that's certainly on the list.
Okay, yeah, over here. Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, interesting talk. You mentioned efficiency. Efficiency's always been on the table as a big lever arm, but the problem with efficiency is we tend to use it up. We don't maintain it. For example, miles per gallon go up. People live farther from work, so that they end up commuting farther. They use the same amount of energy. You build a bigger refrigerator to handle more stuff because the efficiencies of refrigerators have gone up. So, I mean, to say that efficiency is a big part of this, it's maintaining the efficiency so that we don't end up using just as much energy.
Boy, I couldn't agree more. So you probably need more than just the tool of efficiency. At DuPont, what we did, we saw a big stake here. So we just said, here's how much, we put a cap on how much energy we use. So we say, if you want to grow, you better get more efficient. And it's amazing how creative people can get when they want to grow, that they want to expand their business. So I think you're exactly right. We got to put it in the right context because we will use it up. And so it's probably not capable by itself. But as I look at technologies that are non-controversial, that don't depend on what you're going to accomplish here to work, I see that one as really big potential.
Okay, questions? Yeah? No? Okay, yeah, Bert.
You mentioned two things about regulation. One was the Montreal Protocol. The other is the forthcoming Paris. Paris, 196 countries, has to reach a consensus. I'll bet you a quarter it will fail. But nobody talks about getting the 15 top emitters together, which are responsible for over 80% of all emissions, for a new Montreal-like protocol. And I chose the top 15 because the top 15 includes countries like Brazil, Indonesia, India. If you can get them to agree with the big ones, maybe we can get someplace. And you from the business side probably have a much better feel of how to make that work than I do from the academic side.
through this Sustainable Energy for All work, I had a chance to present to 162 countries. That wasn't fun. They were polite enough to let me finish. And then they started reading these papers that had been prepared before I talked. So I had this idea they weren't really about what I was talking about. So the challenge that the Secretary General has of bringing all these countries together, be it at Paris or on anything else, is just tremendous. So I couldn't agree with you more. I think there's a lot of conversations going on between countries. I mean, I think what President Obama's done has been some really steps forward. The EPA regs are a step in the right direction. The communications with China are important. The fact that China kind of understands what's going on, understand their stake in this is very critical. So I think it's a great idea. I think your number is a pretty good number of what could really make a difference. And I do think it's the role of the developed economies to lead. And I think as we do that, we can, through Sustainable Energy All and other efforts, we can bring along the developing economies with time. One thing that's really hit me, though, in SE for All, we have a couple of major U.S. utilities working with us. And they want to look at what does the grid mean in Africa as we build it out. Because we think they might be bringing it right back in this country. What will the grid ultimately mean here? So I think there's a lot of opportunity. We can't leave the developing countries out as we go.
Okay, right next to you, yeah.
The significance of public-private partnerships in addressing the challenges of sustainability globally. If you had to identify the single most high-impact public-private partnership that does not exist today that would tackle some of these challenges, what would your suggested public-private partnership be?
Well, that's a good question. I hope you have an answer to it, too. You thought it out so well. In the SE for All arena, is we look at a country, and we go in and do our diagnostic of what's the problem. And because we say, why can't you invest? These are good economical return projects. It's the rule of law, and it's the ability to make sure people actually pay their electricity bill once we put it in. So if we could take technology, which is available with a cell phone, and we could take the technology available for energy, and then we could help the government understand, here are the 2 or 3 changes you have to make that are critical, that could really be powerful. And so our view is if we could get just a couple countries to do it right, it could be a multiplier effect. We brought in the people that brought cell phones to Africa, and they described what they were up against. It was mainly corruption, government regulations, and so they went from 70% of the people in Africa had never heard a dial tone to 70% of the people in Africa today have access to a cell phone. It's a major change. It was fundamentally, but it was private companies that did it, and the government getting out of the way, but the government seeing how it was going to be in their interest to get out of the way versus a short-term gain on tariffs. And you look at what's happening to solar energy in Africa, it's the same issue today. So I think something like that. Now, did you have a better answer to your question? Okay.
Okay, we've got one back there, and then we'll come up to the front here.
This kind of goes off what was asked before about how do you convince big companies to get on board. I think all of us agree that it's a good thing to combat climate change, but how do you convince a company that it's in their best interest when it negatively affects their bottom line?
Yeah, so a great question. I don't think it's a scientific argument. I think it's to get them to move their planning time horizon out just a bit further. So they see that, okay, here is the opportunity and here's the risk I avoid. And that's why I think the new climate economy report is really good. So if I'm pitching that, I think it's worth a read because it talks through what some of those issues are, where some markets are going to go away and where some new ones will come. And I think what they'll see is that partnering with civil society, which is seen as kind of something you don't do, I think they'll see opportunities in doing that. So I think it's people taking time enough to look at the issue and understand what it is. So again, I don't think it's a scientific argument. It's not something their shareholders are going to talk to them about, except from the downside. So shareholders will vote against a company they think are running high risk. But generally because they believe the time frames are very long, they won't kind of invest in the company short term. That's one reason I like energy efficiency, because the time frames for payoff can be a little bit faster.
Okay, Jim.
Chad, as a corporate leader, you've worked with academic institutions on a whole range of issues. What are some of the lessons you've learned about the partnership between corporations and academic institutions?
The cultures are very different. And I think to try to make the cultures the same is a very long journey. Probably don't have quite enough time for that. So you've got to respect it. Dinners Sally hosted last night. We talked about that there is a real desire for freedom of researchers here to be able to do what they want to do. I don't think you get in the way of that. I think you've got to let that happen. But I think it's very important that both be working together all the time to understand the goals. So a lot of the work we did at DuPont with research institutions was trying to build a very close relationship where we understand each other, what's going on. As I think more about your question, I recall being at a patent dinner at DuPont. I was seated next to an individual who had 100 patents. He was getting his 100th patent that time, or recognizing. I was not sitting there because he had the 100th patent. I was sitting there because he was mad at me, because we were changing the way he was doing some of his research, working more on concrete projects that we might ultimately sell, versus just doing catalyst research, which is what his role was. And he wanted to tell me very clearly what a big mistake it was, and I wanted to give him the opportunity. It was a long dinner, if I can swear. But his point was, if we don't do it, who will? If DuPont's not going to be the leader in catalysts, who will be? And I said, it must be our research universities. And then he looked right back at me and said, what if the research universities aren't there? The answer is they must be. So I think it's very important that industry understand those research universities are extremely important to them, whether it's to a direct partnership or it's just turning out all the research and all the students. They're our lifeblood. So I think it's a good investment for Bank of America or any other company to make sure those research universities stay alive, particularly our publics. They're in the most danger and do turn out 70% of our research and 70% of our PhDs.
Okay, more questions. Okay, well, I've got one. So you told this, positive story about how industry cooperated to, eliminate CFCs and change to a new product line, and it seems like that was an incredibly important part of making it possible to have a Montreal Protocol and so forth. Is there any hope for sectoral approaches? So, for example, could the chemical industry or subsets of the chemical industry or the aviation industry, cooperate to initiate a pathway towards emission reductions that wouldn't penalize any one company over another, but the whole tranche of them would move forward adopting this so that there weren't any winners or losers by agreeing to reduce emissions?
I think there's a great example of that exists. It's called responsible care in the chemical industry. It was the chemical industry waking up and saying, people don't like us. They like our products, but they don't want the plant in the backyard and they don't want the rail car coming through their town. And so we created something, it started in Canada, we adopted it here, it's been adopted essentially around the world. Responsible care, it's a code of conduct. As CEO of DuPont, I had a test every year. People came in and interviewed me to make sure I knew my responsibilities, interviewed the organization. The big companies felt a real need to keep the smaller companies there. If you didn't sign up and follow the rules, we kicked you out of the industry association. If you were kicked out, you had a tough time operating. So I think that's an example that's worked for a long time. So I think you raise a great question. And for the chemical industry, possibly oil and gas industry, possibly aviation, yeah. I think if those industries, it has to be done globally. You could start that dialogue now. I think they would find that what we were worried about in the chemical industry is if we don't do it, they're going to do it to us, and they're not going to do it right. And we can probably do it right ourselves, and we were going to have to be tested with time. Did it work? So I think it's a great example. I think, unfortunately, the government mechanisms don't foster that very well. So I believe that's why it's going to take a few companies showing leadership, like the companies that are sponsoring here today. I think could make a difference. Was that what you had in mind with your
Right,
question?
yeah, because
Yeah.
we all know that, for all these governments, who have so many different competing objectives, to try to get together to agree about something so challenging as climate change is hard. But companies, especially, there aren't that many of the companies in some of these major emitting industries. Steel industry would be another example, yeah. Okay, all right, we've got one over there.
Could you say a little more about the interaction of long-term industry research versus academic research? That is, in terms of what kinds of things could you do inside DuPont that would make sense? What kinds would you look for research universities, and which kinds were overlapped?
So DuPont's been in long-range discovery research since the 1930s. And because we woke up and said we're not going to grow without it. It's something that as CEO I protected, so my chief technology officer, he or she had this much money and we were never going to touch it. It was theirs to use and we weren't going to critique how they used it. We would just every once in a while kind of look in and see, what was going on. But it was very important and I think that was critical. DuPont's very, very strong on biotech today. And this chief technology officer said, I want to take you out to this lab. He wanted to give me a ride out to the lab. I thought it was a little odd. He wanted to drive, So he said, hey, I've got this little skunk works going on. Do you want to see it? And so we pulled into the shopping center. It was a strip mall. And he cut a deal with the University of Delaware. And she was chasing genes, gene sequencing. I'd heard of it, understood it. Sure didn't know we were doing it because he hadn't told anybody we were doing it. And so I went in and I was amazed. But it was because he had that money to work with how he wanted to, that he was spending, about 5% of his allotment on that got us started, which is now the whole future of the company. So that's why I think that's very important that companies keep some of their own discovery research. But these very close links to research universities will be more powerful in the long run. So I think you need both. And if you don't have some yourself, I don't think you have the people that know how to interface with the universities. So I think to give it up totally would be a real mistake, although many companies have. I think it's a step backwards. I wouldn't suggest you go out and talk to your shareholders too much about it until you got something, because it's just not something that sells. But I think it's a real momentum to keep the rest of the company running well to do that. Does that make sense?
Okay, all right. I think we have 2 more questions. How about if we go to the back there and then we'll go over here? Oh, and there's one down there too. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, you can go first. Then you'll go second. You'll go third. Okay.
Good morning. Bill Leedy, the Leedy Foundation, Juneau, Alaska. The energy industry is the world's largest industry, now 85% fossil. Do you think we should agree, as business people, researchers, and citizens, that our objective is nothing less than converting the world's largest industry from 85% fossil to 85% or more renewable energy as quickly as we prudently and profitably can do so?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Next
Can I
question.
elaborate on my yes? Look, if I'm on Shell's board, look at our scenarios, and under both our scenarios, mountains and oceans, we're out of business in oil and gas by the end of the century. And my guess is Exxon has similar numbers. I'm looking to see, but if you look over 3,000 or 4,000 years, coal, oil, and gas are a big blimp. And it's going to change to something else. And so the issue is, do we get there in time so Chris's negative scenarios don't come up? So it's not a question, are we going to get there? So we're going to get there sooner. And I think the energy companies have great capability to help with that transition. So I don't think they're the enemy. I think they're an enabler to make the transition.
Okay, back over here.
Hi. So I see several potential ways of solving a lot of climate issues. One roadblock is really changing opinion. So whether that's in the boardroom or with investors, you really have to change the opinion of these people to change the way they conduct business. And another is sort of treating the symptoms, is research at an academic institution like this. But I see one underlying root that maybe is a potential solution, and that's starting earlier in the educational system to, encourage science and technology research, but also get people to just sort of believe that this is such a huge issue that it's going to continue in the future. And so it seems like that's one potential public-private, solution, is really inspiring these educational programs much earlier than at the college level. Do you have any comment on that?
I agree totally. I think that's absolutely essential, and we just need more funding for it, more determination, probably more individual communities taking the lead themselves. I work with National Geographic, and it's one of the things that we've identified is very important to if we can, because we've got this Geo magazine that goes into the elementary schools. So if we can start putting that in the schools in a form where people can relate to it and understand the details, is critical. I think until we make that change, it will not happen. I do find, I was at a climate conference in the Philippines. People there weren't confused. They understood climate change and it was going to flood them out. And since that conference, it's happened about 3 times. So I think keeping it pretty simple and pretty direct, not too complicated a story. I thought Chris's story hit exactly right. We've got to get that message out, what we're doing. And again, if I come back to the new climate economy, if we say you have to have a lower standard of living to do this, it's a tough sell. But if we say we really can't have at least the same standard of living with only a 5% more penalty, I think that sells.
Okay, and I said we'd do one more here, but we need to be quick.
Yes, hello again. You mentioned your conversations with President Calderon and Carlos Slim. I was curious if you mentioned or if you discussed the solar market in Mexico. Today's installed capacity in Mexico, total installed capacity in solar, is 80 megawatts.
Yeah.
So,
very simple. We didn't talk about that, but I understand your question.
on how to improve this.
I think President Calderon has moved back home. Hopefully he'll be successful with that.
Okay, well, thank you so much. That was wonderful.